I'm here to discuss the latest in branded calling and wanted to just give some background to anybody who's not familiar. I know some in the audience are familiar, very active in some of the engagements we've been doing and pursuing in the industry. But you'll see that there's very similar challenges that branded calling's facing compared to RCS, right? And generally, right, it's branding, whether it be through messaging or voice. That's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to solve for. So yeah, we have similar challenges, and I just wanted to start with that sort of background on that. So what is branded calling? Oftentimes, what is now like defined, branded calling is defined by the standard that ADAS set a couple of years ago, maybe more than a couple of years ago, when they set the stir-shaken framework. So stir-shaken was the basis for preventing spoofed calls. That was what we were trying to solve for, right? So RCD, rich call data, is the way that it can be leveraging stir-shaken so that we can send that branding through the SIP headers in the PSTN world. So just to generalize that, it's how can we use the PSTN to brand our calls? But a long time ago, we were getting calls sometimes delivered with the name on our phones. But how was it done? That was through what we call CNAM, which is, I call the original branded calling, just so everyone's clear. It's, there were databases that were managed by maybe some of the providers in this room, and the carriers would dip those databases for the name. However, that was a cost that was borne by end users. And me as an AT&T user, if I wanted CNAM today, I'd have to pay, I think it was about $3.99 a month for that feature. So it's not as successful, and this is probably why we don't always see that name on the phone, because a lot of us are not paying for that feature. Branded calling serves to have the business pay for it. And it's a new monetization to many players that are going to be part of this branded calling experience. And namely also the carriers will receive revenue. And this is why they are caring about, should we be involved? Should we, put our name behind it? Because they're gonna, experience like all the consumer feedback when something goes wrong, right? They wanna get it right. And this is why I think branded calling came to be more like a discussion that we needed to up-level what we were doing for the last 15, 20 years. We needed a trusted framework. So that's the difference, right, between what we call CNAM today and then where branded calling is going. And CTIA has proposed a framework called Branded Calling ID, and this is where it would augment the stir-shaken protocols so that we could introduce more of a general framework for vetting. And that is what we think we need, right? And this is the same probably challenge that RCS faces too. Vetting is critical. Onboarding is also critical. We need it to be easy enough for an enterprise to onboard. So why is it so important? Certainly consumers want to be able to interact both with voice and messaging. Dual function numbers are what we call like the power to be able to send communications out via calls and messages. It's critical to make both work. And I say omni-channel support is critical because we know, and WhatsApp, Apple, they're in those discussions. They want to get this right. And Twilio just announced last week a partnership with Meta to introduce WhatsApp Business Calling API for programmable voice customers that also leverage our programmable messaging. So very cool. I have a slide later on that shows sort of a picture of what that looks like. But it's the ability to interact with the consumers and let the consumer call in if they need to have a more personalized interaction. We're very excited. Now, that's only launching in countries like Brazil, Mexico, India, and Indonesia. But it's setting the stage for what's to come, really, right? This may be more ubiquitous as businesses want to get their brands out there and communicate more personalized with their consumers. Okay, so I touched a little bit on this, but this is a Twilio perspective. These are the current challenges we see to branded calling, just based on our experience with it, with our enterprises. And I can echo what Caitlin said earlier. I mean, I spend most of my days educating, and that's whether it be with the enterprise, the carriers, and all the players in the middle. And I sometimes say Twilio serves as like the bridge between the new software world that we're living in and the old telecom world that we're also living in. So yeah, I mean, I listed some things here, CNAM, right? Missing a trust anchor, right? How do we make sure that that name is validated, that that person is who they say they are, that they have the right to use, that name? That's what we're trying to solve for. So today's version of branded calling that you're more frequently probably seeing is out of band, which just essentially could be like an SDK on a phone app, and that name is being presented. Oftentimes, the pricing's very high, right? And can be an obstacle for enterprises, right? Like, if I just said 30 to 40x because the price of a voice call in US and Canada is fairly cheap. So considering that the cost of a branded call is on a per call basis, it just very much increases that cost of a call. So yeah, it prevents some enterprises from wanting to, engage in that channel because of that. In-band, which is the branded calling that I was referring to, where it leverages stir, shake, and framework, and we call RCD, rich call data. This is the thing that CTI is proposing as the sort of solution to the industry challenge. It's in early stages. I mean, we've been talking about it for years, but to get all the players in the industry aligned and agreeing to the model and all the roles that we all play is very challenging, if you can imagine. We're getting closer. So we're doing active tests right now with multiple carriers, and it's very exciting to see the progress of what we could see, what this could be, so that instead of just looking at the phone and saying, oh, well, I don't know who that is, so I'm not answering it, you actually can engage with the brands you want to, right? That I can get those prescription reminders that I actually wanted instead of not answering because I just don't recognize that phone number. However, the challenge is to in-band or RCD is that it requires 100% IP. And for anyone not familiar, voice has got a lot of technicalities involved with transiting a call, and there's still a lot of old TDM infrastructure, both the US and Canada. I mean, we've made progress, but it's going to take more time to get to that full 100% IP transition. So it is critical to have those direct connects with operators, and that is just, it's hard to do that at scale, right? But that's where we're going. And then I wanted to bring up this just for, similarities to RCS. KYC scalability. There are customers that use both channels, and they have some of the same challenges because the onboarding and vetting experience is very different, although it's asking for the same things, right? They don't know why they have to go through two different flows. And in some ways, they're very right? Like, who are you as a business? How can you vet that you have the right to use a logo? That applies for both branded calling and RCS. So it would be great, of course, if the industry could scale to something like, getting alignment between both channels. It's just very hard to do. I'm totally aware of that. But I just wanted to bring it up for this audience just because it's just something we hear all the time. And we're trying to solve those challenges so that we can get more onboarding happening and we can get more growth out of the channel. So there's similar use cases. I mentioned the prescription reminders and fulfillment. We have banking alerts, right? If you don't get you by text, you can get it by a call. Customer support interaction. It can happen both ways, and sometimes customers want to engage on a more personalized level via the voice channel. And last mile delivery, we're all familiar with the Uber and the DoorDashes, and now there's even retail stores, right, that want to engage with you. If they can't reach you via text for confirmation, they'll call you. And if they can't get that delivery delivered, it hurts their business. So they want these messages and calls to be, received and then, communicated back because it helps them complete the orders. So that's critical, and we are actively engaged with many businesses that we're all familiar with to do that, and they want to do it for both messaging and voice. So as I said earlier, there's a screenshot of a WhatsApp, business that is engaging in messaging, and then there's the call to action so that a consumer, if they want to make a call, they're given that call button. And it drives higher engagement, and sometimes they just want that. They want that more personalized experience. So we're working towards this in a couple countries, trying to see how things go, and getting that feedback loop so that we can expand beyond those countries right now. So I mentioned the CTIA branded calling ID world, and this is the framework that the CTIA and many partners, some in this room, are engaged with to ensure there is a trusted ecosystem for branded calling. It's really the future as we see it, because Stir Shaken was always touted as, it's not the silver bullet. We know that. There's lots of challenges. I mean, I'm not even sure if all of us as consumers understand what the check mark means when you get it on the call. It's meant to say, okay, that call is not spoofed, right? That's it. But there's something more that we need to say is, who are you? Is this a fraudulent call? What's the intent of this? That's what branded calling is here to solve for. And if we use the Stir Shaken framework that's already here, the FCC mandated it, Canada mandated it, then we can make it more valuable. And that's the key to this. It's very complicated. I tried to make it a simple slide based on how we see it, but just, I can send this later. I can send this later. But there's a slew of roles in the ecosystem. There's onboarding agents, there's vetting agents, there's originating service providers, and then there's the signing agent. All of these roles need to play and act, according to what they signed up for. And if they don't, there's repercussions, right? You don't get to be that, you don't get to act in that role anymore. And that's just to introduce accountability in a way that we haven't seen it before. And this also allows multiple entities to participate. I mean, the way that we see it, right? It's one for all, but you have to play by the rules. Of course, accountability will only come as far as enforcement goes, and that's the other key to solving sort of the challenges that we may see in the future. But this is exciting because this is, I think, why we've wanted to, get Stir Shaken out the door and to finally augment it with something that means something to a consumer and to a business. So this is just a very broad overview of what it would look like, but this is the kind of thing we're testing right now with carriers. And we're seeing success right now with logo and name in our testing, and yeah, we're just looking forward to the future and getting, branded in a bigger way and making sure that enterprises are happy with it because they're the ones who are going to drive the growth. So yeah, that's a little something about branded calling, and happy to answer any questions anybody would have.
Questions, anybody? Well, I have one question.
Okay.
What does the buy button look like right now for the brand?
The buy button, yeah, that's, today's flavor that most enterprises would buy is using the out-of-band. So there's a couple providers out there, such as Haya as an example, or First Orion, TNS, and they would sell a model on a per-call basis. So that's what it is. I mean, the hardship here is that sometimes the cost of those calls are just so expensive that some enterprises struggle to, enroll, really. And so we're trying to find that balance of we have all these new things we need to do to ensure a trusted framework, but what's the market price so that it can grow? Otherwise, everything we're doing in the middle will just, it's not going to be valuable, if we can't, deliver this at scale. So, yeah, and that's what it is today. And certainly there's some challenges with that too, where sometimes there's not all operators are aligned on branding at the same time through the same mechanism. So, a business that doesn't understand the ecosystem just wants their call branded with all the operators, not 2 of the 3 or something. Those are the kind of challenges we see, and this is what we're trying to solve for with this, more sort of trusted framework. And I step back to say that businesses often don't care whether it's in-band or out-of-band or OTTs involved. They just want the solution. They just want end users to be receiving those calls so they can see the increase in conversion rates, the increase in pickup rates, so that we can all feel trusted in this channel.
Great. Question right there.
Do we have a sense of statistics of how many people don't answer their phones anymore? Because I know for one, if I don't recognize that number, there's just...
It's high. I don't know the number
As
off
an
the top of my
industry-
head, but I don't answer most calls that are
So
unbranded.
it's basically pervasive. Most of us don't answer calls anymore.
Pretty much.
It's made me think in the last 10 years how much our behavior has changed. We used to take all calls, especially when it was a wired line. We'd always answer the phone, and now nothing gets through.
Right. That's why I feel like this is it for, I've been hearing voice is going to be dead for the whole length of my career, and I've been in voice, for most of my time. So this is the most exciting sort of venture. Now, there's many ways to get it wrong, and
Right.
we don't want that because then, again, the trust will be eroded. And this is all meant to restore trust
Right.
in this channel. And yeah, I'm solving for what I want to see as a consumer.
I think voice is dead is a misnomer. It's not voice is dead. Incoming calls are dead in a sense, if
Yeah.
I don't know who it is. And obviously this will go a long way in solving the problem, because if my bank is calling me, I know it's a good reason. But today it's always some telemarketing that I've never invited into my life.
Yeah, banks are one of the biggest enterprises that, or verticals that want this.
Right. Solves a big
And they
problem.
want, their branding to be there for messaging too. I'm sure they would just as much want RCS as they would want branded calling, because it's the same experience, the same logo, same business, just interacting with multiple channels.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Any more questions? I can run. I'm running.
So years ago, easy texting used to be a voice platform. And one of the things we learned was the reason people stopped answering phone calls was because they didn't know the subject of the call. So it's not just the brand.
Yep.
So I wonder if there's something to sort of talk about here where maybe they could put the subject of the call
Yes.
as they're calling. Because that will influence more people to pick up the phone. Because if it's your bank calling about your mortgage, you might pick up.
Yep. No, reason for call is the biggest, piece of this puzzle too. So yeah, and then verifying that it actually is that particular reason, making sure that those calls are labeled as such correctly. We started with testing the name, and now we're testing the logo. I think name and logo right now within this framework is what we're testing, but obviously call reason would be the last piece of that puzzle. And then the other thing that businesses need is the feedback loop. This is only as valuable as the feedback that's received by the business, and if we don't have that, how can we prove that this works in a wider scale? So that's the other piece we really desperately need for the enterprises, because we're trying to promote this. We're trying to get the growth moving so that we can trust those voice calls and messages for that matter. So yeah, good question.
No, I'm actually, it's actually not Twilio asking. It is Twilio. Thanks, John. Thanks for getting me all distracted. Now everyone's happy. Yeah. I just spent 2 weeks with a bunch of octogenarians who don't answer the phone. And these are my parents and their friends who have to listen to me talking about don't respond to any text messages, don't do all these things because, there's a lot of fraud out there. But it's really interesting because now they all have their physicians, the person they talk to at the bank's mobile numbers in their phones. Mm-hmm. Because even if they use CNAM, my parents have CNAM on their phones because I'm a nerd. Yeah. And because I got it forever ago, right?
Yeah,
so you have
exactly.
to keep it going. But long and short of it, they don't know if it's really the bank when it says it's the bank. Yeah. Which is the criticality of actually having the logo. Because even if somebody's spoofing something, they will get to the point. But I actually don't know if they'll get to the point where the fraudsters are going to be spoofing logos on calls, right? But spoofing phone numbers or spoofing a business name is actually easier than spoofing the logo.
Well, and
I was
that's
just saying that.
That's the problem with Scenium, was that I think that could happen at scale pretty
Yeah.
easily. And we have to put a little bit more friction in the whole process to ensure that, this person has the right to use the logo. They have the right to use it. They are the authorized person at that business. But then again, we can't have too many obstacles. Otherwise, we don't get to a meaningful growth, acceleration that we need and want. So it's such a balance, and that's the role we play in, right? We're trying to strike that right balance with all the industry participants. We want to solve this, and it seems like a lot of the industry does as well. So we're just trying to find those solutions that'll work for consumers and businesses, because they're not caring necessarily how it happens in the middle. There is a lot of intricacies, technicalities that we have to we have to be in the weeds on that. But we're trying to make it easy enough for the businesses and then restore the trust of the consumers. And yeah, it's critical now. You have another question?
It's just great content. We're all super engaged.
Yay!
No, amazing. It's a really lot of awesome content. I did want to ask you a question sort of from your perspective. So when you're thinking about all of the different pieces and parts, like this is quite literally a jigsaw puzzle to get to branded calling. And branded calling is what like the enterprises are asking for. Like it's what the solution, they're sort of jumping to that. But before that, you have all of sort of this. And so internally at Bandwidth, we're sort of using the word number reputation services to really talk about all this other stuff that is maybe more applicable to some of the people in this room. But I was just curious, sort of from y'all's perspective, like how are you talking about that, and how are you sort of talking to maybe your customers that are one or two steps removed from the enterprise about this, because all of that is necessary to get to the branded calling piece?
Yeah, no, great question. It is important to get the reputation right. We try to educate on calling patterns, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and there's TCPA that you have to follow, right? And there's a lot of data signals these days about what your reputation is, and we're trying to augment that as much as we can, get all the signals in, because it's important to get that piece right, because even without branded calling, right, their calls could be labeled as spam, and we see that. And sometimes it's very valid, and sometimes they get it wrong. It's easy to do that, because with calling, we can't see the content. It's much harder to understand that intent. So yeah, we rely more on like the data signals, the traffic, patterns, the velocity rates, the do not originate calling list that I know many in this room operate. So yeah, it is the step before that. So we sort of think of, it's a progressive trust framework, right? So even before branded calling, we call it voice integrity, but it's like register your business, your profile, so that we can at least send those data signals out to all the analytic companies that are working for the mobile operators. Just as a key step to like announcing who you are and, trying to bring trust to the, ecosystem. So that's like step 0 in our, opinion, and reputation is a big part of it, because you can go through this framework and still be branded as spam, because it's happening today, right? There are calls that are going through the branded calling process, and they can still be, labeled as spam, because the calling patterns and then the customer feedback, like, okay, I don't want these calls. That's just as important, and the business has to know that, which is why we need the feedback loop. Super important, right? And sometimes we don't get those data signals. I know today, like, I would struggle to get that consumer, feedback loop, other than just calls rejected. But I don't know why they're rejected. I need to know if they're rejected because it's spammy or not, right? That would be nice to have. I think that's sort of what messaging sort of gets a little bit more of an up level on, is because they have all that data.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Thank you.